I look forward to hearing from Mr. North, a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. Mr. North will provide a different perspective.
And our next witness is David North, a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank. He joined in 2008. In addition to posts in federal and state government, he's a former assistant to U.S. Secretary of Labor, and he's conducted immigration policy research for several decades. Mr. North, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Grassley. We're gathered here to discuss what I think is, contrary to what my friend to the right just said, is a dysfunctional portion of a silly program, which should be allowed to wither and die. As background, the INA in its employment-based section permits aliens to secure green cards by investing various sums in the nation. This is the program for the fifth and lowest priority of aliens coming through the employment-based section, and therefore it's called EB-5. The most troublesome part of the EB-5 program relates to the regional centers, largely private for-profit entities, not true in Vermont, that identify investments that can provide green cards to aliens making $500,000 short-term investments. That sum allows the alien and his family, after 2 years, to secure a full set of green cards. The other part of the program permits the issuance of green cards for a full $1 million investment without reference to the regional centers. It's the regional center part of the program which is up for reauthorization, not the larger program, which has some of its own problems. My conclusions about these programs come after examining the American program from the outside fairly carefully, and after having been retained by the government of Australia some years ago to evaluate its somewhat comparable program from the inside. There's 7 reasons for my views. 1, the program is placed in a very odd and non-helpful bureaucratic location for the stimulation of international investment in the United States. 2, its scale is all wrong. We're giving away too much for too small an investment. Further, raising venture capital at $500,000 a tranche is, to say the least, inefficient. The big guys don't do it that way. The regional centers, with their $500,000 schemes, essentially undercut the more sensible $1 million part of the EB-5 program. Such programs, if we have them at all, as they do in Australia, should be about creating business entities, not passive investments. It should be about creating real jobs, not elaborate calculations about the indirect creation of jobs, which is now part of the legislation. 4, the EB-5 program by its nature attracts subpar investments and often scandals. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why it has failed year after year to reach the legislative goal of 10,000 investment visas. 5, the regional center program is inherently clumsy, and the program is too filled with middlemen, both public and private. The program has more than its share of scandals, which I'll get into later if anybody's interested. It should not be streamlined, which is what USCIS is currently suggesting. This is an agency that loves to say yes to applicants, but as the table in my testimony shows, USCIS officers have much more trouble with EB-5 applications than others. I think that's something that nobody's really talked about much. There are high rates of internal denials in this program, and for good reason. Some of the paper they see must be pretty dreadful. In this program, visas go to people who could not get them any other way, and to people whose planned investment is actually less, according to the Federal Reserve, than the average mean net worth of all American families in 2007. Let me expand on one of my observations. In 2009, total foreign investment in the United States increased by $1.9 trillion, according to the Department of Commerce. My estimate, based on the investors' green card applications filed 2 years after the first investment, this is the solid ones that remain and are approved, this is 2009, was that they had about $191 million confirmed. That's my estimate. USCIS does not provide the kind of data that we could use on this. And that was a good year for the program. So for every $100 of increased foreign investment that year, the EB program contributed 1 penny. Under a much more wobbly statistical base, the initial applications of would-be immigrant investors, USCIS is telling journalists that the level of investment in the just concluded year was about $1.2 billion. Let's accept that. But even that number makes that ratio only 6 cents for every $100 of additional foreign investment in a typical year. Thank you for listening to me. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you. Mr. North, along the same lines of the question I asked him, has your research shown examples other, and I only gave one example, so I want to admit that and be responsible about it, of centers hiring undocumented individuals?
That kind of data is very hard to obtain from USCIS. And I must say that what we do know about many of the internal things about that agency, and as far as this program is concerned, relates to cases in which the staff has said no to an application of some kind, and then the regional center or the individual entrepreneur has gone to the Administrative Appeals Office, which is part of the agency that you used to be engaged in, and there we get documents. We get a hearing officer telling us what's going on in that particular case. There were 28 cases that were appealed in the year, I think it was 2009, and in every single case, the AAO hearing officers, administrative law judges, said, yeah, the staff was right. This is a bad application. So there's a quantity of bad applications out there, but only once that process gets before an administrative law judge do we see much in the way of detail. Now, there was one case that you mentioned, and let me just elaborate on that a little bit. This is a bankrupt, and there's a lot of this going on, a bankrupt dairy farm in South Dakota that was funded by...
Don't take too long, because I want to ask another couple questions, but go ahead and quickly finish.
The dairy farm, not the regional center, the dairy farm had claimed 17 workers, and they got into it, and the judge found that 16 of them were illegals. Now, that's the one example I have, and it's a good example.
Okay. I'm going to ask separate questions of each three of you, but it deals with this one issue. As I said in my opening statement, I'm concerned about the potential loophole that allows investors to withdraw their investment in regional centers after receiving their green card. So, Mr. Devine, are you aware of any instances in which an investor withdrew the investment and walked away immediately after receiving a green card? And if you have, or if you think it's a problem, do you think that it's a loophole that should be closed? And Mr. North, do you have any a comment in regard to my question or what the other two witnesses have suggested?
Yes, I do. Very quickly, the law says you can take the money out after 2 years. In some cases, you find that that's maybe not a good idea, or maybe the investee won't let you. But the law says you got to invest for 2 years, and that's all. Secondly, at one of the stakeholders meetings put on by USCIS, I asked the question, have you done any research on how much money stays beyond the 2 years? And the answer was no. There's sort of a lack of curiosity in that agency about some of these things.
Mr. North, I may have a few comments about your comments. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, one thing
out of fairness to you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to make simply one point. We have apparently a tremendous success story. We haven't heard about the profits that the investors received on this thing yet, but we apparently have a successful operation. I don't think that the United States Senate should operate on anecdotes, and I think that looking at this thing from a greater distance, perhaps without knowledge of ski resorts, I'm a little old to ski, I don't think that we should rely too much on one glorious anecdote, and I'll leave it at that.
Reuters recently reported on how cash-hungry American businesses are working abroad to promote the EB-5 Regional Center program. Many of these EB-5 promoters are mischaracterizing the program, luring investors here and robbing them on American Dream. And admittedly, if you get something out of Reuters, I suppose it's got to be considered somewhat anecdotal too. But China has reportedly put restrictions on these promoters. And when asked by Reuters, both the USCIS and the Security and Exchange Commission were unaware of any marketing abuses. So rhetorically, I want to ask, but don't expect an answer from any of you on this point. Is it possible that everyone outside the Beltway is aware of these promoters and yet our government sits idly by? Going on in the same question, your experience on whether anything more needs to be done, or if you even see it as a problem, and Mr. Stinger first, and then Mr. North, and then I'll go on to my last question. Mr. North, if you see it as a problem, give me your answer.
I do see it as a problem, and it's aggravated by the fact that the agency, USCIS, is currently trying to streamline its review of these proposals. They've set up a new command structure. They're bringing in new staff, hopefully, that will say yes a little more often than the staff that's there now. There's a tremendous flow of questionable documentation. USCIS picks up some of it, as you see in the table in my report, and a lot of it doesn't get picked up till later, and it shows up in the Administrative Appeals Office decisions. There have been difficulties, and I'll just tick these off very quickly, with a plan to use Iranian funds to revive the old Watergate Hotel here in town. A scheme so lacking in integrity in the Mojave Desert that the EB-5 center itself was terminated. Similarly, one in El Monte, California, where it turns out that some of the developers had some pretty questionable backgrounds. There's an attempt.
You can go on, but I want to.
I won't.
I think you're talking about my last question.
All right.
No, go ahead. I think I just kind of want you at that point, as long as you're using it to answer the other question, mostly explain what went wrong at these centers, Mojave and the real estate development El Monte.
Generally, it turned out that not necessarily the regional center people, but the developers, and these are two different sets of people, the developers in those two places were snake oil salesmen. And USCIS sort of found out in this case, but there are other snake oil salesmen out there that have not been detected. And I just think there ought to be more, not fewer, checks and balances.
Mr. North, would you share about Australia or Canada, if you would, and how they feel about it and how you evaluate its success or failure in those countries?
I will comment on Australia because I know something about that, and less on Canada. Australia is interested in entrepreneurs and people who are going to put together businesses as opposed to passive investment. Our program is largely one of passive investment. Australia also has is more demanding about age. They want you to be under 45 under one set of circumstances, under 55 in another. They have a strong preference for managers, and they also ask for more money than we do. This is American dollars, not Australian dollars. They want $778,000 for one class and $1.5 million for another class. So they're getting more money from their people, and since theirs is a smaller economy than ours, same amount of money goes a lot further. And so they're getting they got more bang for their buck than we do. And I think that what Australia is doing is typical of a bunch of other countries, that they require more money than the United States does. And if we're going to be doing this, I think we should be doing it at least at the $1 million level.
I think that's something we should consider.